I'm Julie Eklund. I'm the Assistant Commissioner in the Strategic Planning area at the Higher Education Coordinating Board. I'm sorry that we weren't able to be with many of you at the Summer TACRO conference. We always look forward to that conference every July and being able to provide reporting updates and other information to all of you. So we thought it would be worthwhile to have a webinar to not only provide information on a very important topic, and that's the changes to the CBM 002 that are coming forward with some of the TSI adjustments that are being made during COVID. That's obviously important, but we're also going to take some time to provide you with some other reporting updates and relevant information. I've actually been on Zoom calls and Teams calls and now a WebEx call already this morning. I think many of us are living in this new world where we're working electronically, we're working online from home, and I'm sorry we're not able to be with all of you, but do know that we're all very much here to support you as we are all moving through some of these challenging times. I will briefly introduce members from my staff who are on the call, as well as our Assistant Commissioner for the funding area, and then I'm going to hand it over to John Dinning. He's going to present just a couple of slides on key reporting updates. He'll hand it off to Melissa Humphreys, who will talk about the TSI-2 changes, and then I'm going to go ahead and provide you some information regarding some other reporting updates, particularly some that pertain to changes during this coronavirus era. So first, brief introductions. Dr. Melissa Humphreys is with us. She is the director in our area who handles P16 transitions and research, and her area handles developmental education. Many of you, I'm sure, have probably spoken with her and worked with her. We also have John Dinning, who is the Assistant Director of our Education Data Center, and Victor Rania, the Director of our Education Data Center. John is going to be presenting, and Victor is doing the honors of managing the WebEx. We have some staff from our college readiness and success areas who are going to be here to help. And I mentioned earlier that we have Emily Cormier with us. She is the new Assistant Commissioner for Funding, and so she is now handling the area that works with formula funding, and she and I have been working very closely together, and she's available in case anything comes up regarding reporting related to formula funding. So we're both here together to help handle those calls if needed, or those questions if needed. With that being said, I apologize if I missed any key folks who are going to be involved in the presentation today. What I did also want to mention, Dr. Yuji Kim, who's with us, and she has been working very closely. She works on Dr. Humphrey's team, and she works very closely with the developmental education program as well. So I'm going to hand it over now to John. And I did want to add, the way we're going to structure this is we're going to present in these three segments that I mentioned. After each of us is through, then we're going to take questions through the chat. I imagine we have several people on the call, and we thought that would be an easier way to work through questions. So again, please listen to the presentation, be thinking about your questions, be typing your questions into the chat, and then when we're through with each portion of the presentation, we will be happy to address questions. Okay, John, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is John Dinning. I'm the Assistant Director of the Educational Data Center. Let's go to the first slide. So we're going to start with just an update on the EDC portal. As most of you, I'm sure, know, the coordinating board is migrating from MOVEit, which is the way that institutions have submitted reports for many years, to the new EDC portal. And there are some important upgrades and user-friendly features that have been added. Our IT group has worked very hard on this. And they're continuing the migration with the next two reports being the OE1 and the OOT. I see a comment in the chat box. Oh, there we go. Now the slide looks clean. Great. So the next two reports that are going to be coming through the EDC portal will be the OE1, and that's going to start in the summer 2020. So the next OE1 after spring will have to go through the EDC portal. It will no longer be able to be submitted in MOVEit. And for the universities, the new CBM OOT. This is the transfer report related to SB 25, and that will be due in the fall, and that will also be through the new EDC portal. Go to the next slide. SIP 2020 changes. So every 10 years, they update the SIP codes. So that change is upon us right now. Dr. Eklund sent out a memorandum on June 22nd. If you scroll to the very bottom of it, you'll find a link. It's easy to miss, so you'll want to review that memo. That link has an Excel workbook attached to it. And that workbook details all of the data elements from the different CBM reports that include SIP codes. Some of those may be labeled approval number in the case of the CTCs with course numbers, but those are based on SIP codes. So in that workbook, you can see all the elements that will be affected by the 2020 update. And there's a general rule where reports for the fall will need to come in with the new SIP codes. Although we did have a couple of exceptions to facilitate the transition. These exceptions were based on discussions with reporting officials, as well as looking back at what was done in 2010. So for the summer OE1, that will be reported after September, but with summer data. And so that can use either the 2010 or the 2020 SIP codes in the major field on the OE1. As well as the fall CBM 001, the major field can use either 2010 or 2020 SIP codes. And then after that, only 2020 SIP codes will be accepted. And then the other exception was approval numbers on the OOS. This applies to the CTCs. They may use either 2010 or 2020 codes for the summer OOS submission. So those are the high-level updates regarding the SIP 2020 codes, and I would encourage you to find that memo if you're not familiar with it, and in particular, the Excel spreadsheet that's attached has a lot of good information. Let's go see if there's one more slide in there. And this is a note for, I know HRIs mostly will not be participating in this call. It's about the CBM 002, which is not reported by the HRIs. But for those folks on the call who may be reporting for universities as well as an HRI, this might be interesting for you. As you might already know, the Formula Funding Advisory Committee recommended that the THUCB include enrollments of professional students in academic courses in their next formula funding recommendations. We identify those enrollments with the flexible entry, which is item 17 on the CBM 001 when it has a value of 2. In the past, these enrollments were not funded, and this was an optional. It was optional for an HRI to include these unfunded enrollments using flexible entry 2. But based on the Formula Advisory Committee recommendation, we will need to see those now. So we just simply removed the statement in the CBM manual saying that this was optional for HRIs. So moving forward, they should definitely be reporting any academic enrollments for their professional students in dual degree programs. And those are the updates from the Educational Data Center. And if there's any questions about those 3 slides, please put them in the chat and we can address the best we can.
Thank you very much, John. And we also, if we see questions pop up later, we'll make sure we take some time at the end if you think of something as we move forward. And unfortunately, I am not able to see the chat. So if we're good, I think we'll move on. And Melissa Humphreys will present the CBM 002 updates. Melissa? Melissa, I'm not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry about that. I couldn't find my. All right, so many of you know that there have been changes to how students can be placed into college level courses for, it was starting this summer and then through next summer. So I want to go through the FAQs that the commissioner put out earlier this summer having to do with this, and then we'll go over what we updated in the actual manuals to help us collect information about these changes. So first, this is from the COVID FAQ page that's on our website, and I believe Julie will show where to find that later in the presentation. But one of the questions that is answered there is, sorry, let me go back, is what options can be provided to undergrad non-exempt students as far as placement due to TSI is concerned. So in addition to the traditional measures that are in rule and statute, such as meeting certain TSIA benchmarks or meeting exemptions on SAT, ACT, things like that, now institutions are able to use other indicators such as high school GPA, high school course taking, other factors in order to decide whether a student should be placed directly into a college level course without developmental ed support. Just a reminder that institutions can still choose to place these students who are non-exempt into a co-requisite option, which, they're still in that first college level course, but they have the developmental ed support. But this FAQ states that institutions can use other information to go ahead and place them directly into that first college level course. So it's per rule 4.55, and again, this is all linked to the FAQ, and then that is linked to the actual rule if you want to take a look at that. But because of this, we are changing, or we added a few options in the actual manual to be able to capture when a student is being placed based on these other factors. Before I go into the actual manual, I also want to show that in the FAQ, there's also a question specifically about non-exempt high school students who may be enrolling for dual credit. And so the same placement options are available to high school students. So institutions can look at things such as high school GPA, non-cognitive factors, to place a student into a college level course, even if they're in high school. Also, something that is available now during this time period is that institutions can place a high school student into a co-requisite model for these college level courses. What I highlighted here is that although this is available to high school students now, it's not eligible for state funding if this is done. And like the slide before, both of these options, right, as of now, they're effective from this summer 2020 through summer 2021. So this is what we based our reporting changes on. The first change we made is for items 20, 40, and 60 on the 002, which are where you indicate what the TSI status is for a student at census date. We've added an option Z. I didn't put all the other options because you all know those, I'm sure. But we added an option Z, which indicates that you do not know the actual TSI status of the student. So this would be the case if a student has not been able to take the TSIA yet because they haven't been able to come to campus to take it, or slots for online testing were limited. For whatever reason, if they start the semester and you don't actually know their TSI status, you can indicate it here. I will state also, so part of the FAQ, I'll go back, for dual credit students, it goes over that an option for placing dual credit students is to mark them as a non-degree seeking student. And that would be the appropriate place to indicate that that the student is non-degree seeking here as well. So basically, this is just if you do not have enough information to know the TSI status, all the other rules still apply. TSI status is the same. If they meet any of the exemptions or waivers that are already in rule and statute, then they are TSI met. If you know their TSIA score and they did not meet the benchmark, then they are not TSI met. So you would go ahead and indicate that as you usually do. So in items 21A, 41A, 61A, the option we've added is for you to indicate that the student has a placement waiver, and we're calling it a COVID-19 placement waiver. So this is for students who, based on the FAQ that I showed you earlier, you are placing not based on the scores that you see on TSIA, you're placing them based on high school GPA, their course taking in high school, or whatever other information your institution has decided to use for placement. So basically, for reporting purposes, we're calling it a waiver because the student is either we don't know their TSI status or they are not TSI met, and you are giving them a waiver to enroll in that college level course without DE support based on these other factors. So it's the waiver language, I just want to say, is just for reporting purposes because that's how we refer to ways that students can enroll in college level courses for that aren't permanent. So that's why we're calling it a waiver. And so this is added to each subject item in the 002. And I'll talk a little bit about later this portion that says that we're going to send out a separate survey to ask exactly what your placement method is. As far as reporting on the 2 goes, we're not asking anything about the exact method you're using, what their high school GPA was or anything like that. We just need you to indicate this student was placed not based on traditional factors that we know, SAT, TSIA. They were placed based on these new indicators that your institution is using. Finally, the third item that's been updated is TSI status at the end of the semester. And again, we just added a Z for to indicate that the student's TSI status is still unknown. Hopefully by the end of the semester, especially if they actually did take some kind of course, you will know their TSI status by the end of the semester. But there are a few instances that, perhaps they didn't enroll at all in that subject. In that semester, you may still not know their TSI status, and we want to be sure we don't indicate that they're met or not until you have enough information based on the waivers and exemptions that are in rule or statute. Let's see. So in the updated manual that should be posted now online, where we've added these items, we have included a chart basically to go over situations that may be different starting this summer through next year, and how you would report them with these new options. So first, if the student has not met any of the traditional waivers or exemptions for TSI, and you do not know, or they don't have a known TSIA score, that's when you would mark them as TSI status unknown on those items by census date. However, if you do know their TSIA score and that score shows that they did not meet the college readiness benchmark, you still should mark them as not met. And just a reminder, if they're not met based on their TSIA scores, still include that information, the exact score, to us later on in the report. And then in the next item that we added an option to, having to do with waivers and exemptions, if the student was placed based on these new placement charts that you may be putting to, your institution may be using that have things such as high school GPA and high school course taking. If they're placed using that information and not in a COREC model, if you're placing them directly into that college level course without any DE support, that's when you'll indicate this option Z, which is a placement waiver, a COVID placement waiver. If the student did not take a course in the subject area, or you decided to put them in a COREC model, then you will still report them as normal. So in those situations, those students would be marked with no exemption or waiver granted anyway, so you'll just continue on reporting them in the traditional way. And then finally, for the students who at the beginning of the semester, you said the TSI status was unknown. I won't go through each situation. This is it's in the actual manual, but the basis of this is if the student did anything to indicate that they met TSI, so that would be if they passed exit level DE, if they passed a first college level course, if they took the TSIA before the end of the semester and met that benchmark, any of those things would mean that you would mark that they were TSI met by the end of the semester. So if they did any of the things that traditionally that are in rule or statute would make them TSI met, go ahead and move them from unknown from the census date to we know their status and they're met by the end. If they tested on the TSIA before the end of the semester and they did not meet that benchmark, you will mark them as you would normally as no, they did not meet the status, because now you know their status and it's not met. If they didn't take a course in the subject area, they're still unknown. So those are we tried really hard to not change a lot in the reporting. So we just added these options to those 3 items. I want to give you a few more updates before I answer questions. First, we will be sending out, or we will be putting questions about what the exact placement methods your institution is using. We're going to include that on the DEPS survey for the fall. So that will go out to the DEPS contacts we have on file, and we will be asking them to tell us exactly what items you all are using to determine whether a student should be going into a college level course. Also, as you all know, HB 2223 data recertification has been going on. It looks like we have most of the error-free data in. So UG and I will be contacting the institutions that did submit new data. We'll be contacting you over the next few weeks. So look out for our emails. Also, another thing to note is that the TSIA 2.0, which is coming, and we've talked about it before, but a major change of that is that reading and writing will be in the same test. It'll be combined. So it will change reporting a little bit. The start date of that has been pushed to January 2021. I think it's January 11th. And we will update the CBM as soon as the new scores have been approved. They've already gone through the process of standard setting, so they're actually in the process of getting these approved, so it will be pretty soon, but we don't want to update the manual until we know the scores, and we'll be sure to send a memo out when we have that information. Finally, we have a new email address for all things TSI data related, which will go to both myself and Yuji Kim, Dr. Yuji Kim. That way we won't miss anything. Either one of us can answer most of your questions, and then this way we'll make sure nothing's falling through the cracks. If you have any questions about TSI data or the 002 or HB 2223 data, put this email in your contacts and use this, and I think this will be a really good way to make sure we can answer everyone's question. Okay, so let's go to the chat.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Melissa, this is Julie. I just want to jump in with a couple of things. Thank you very, very much, and thank you for all the work that's gone into this. We actually had a work group that the Texas Association of Community Colleges pulled together folks from universities, from the two-year colleges, from the coordinating board to get together and talk about changes to the 002. One thing I just want people to understand that this is very important reporting that you're going to be doing. I'm really pleased that Melissa and Yuji they've created this email box. They're making themselves very available for questions. The reason it's important is because this is a real change in terms of the flexibility that's being allowed for student placement. And it's going to be very important that we track the outcomes of these students and that we're able to do research and understand what happens with these students as they move through higher education, as they come in and get placed in these different ways. That's why these additional item options, it's important to understand correct reporting there, and also why we're going to collect the information on the depths for exactly what the different institutions are doing in terms of their student placement. So we very, very much appreciate the work that you'll do to update your reporting to accurately reflect these changes that are coming in. And it is going to be critical for the field because we're going to be looking very closely. It's a priority of our commissioners to look very closely at these data so that we can understand how these changes impacted students. So again, thank you, Melissa. We worked hard to keep the options to a minimum and not added any new items, as you mentioned, and that's why we will be collecting the additional data on depth. So I'll let you jump in with the questions now.
Oh, thanks, Julie, for that context. So the first question I see is, if the student takes the TSI test, the TSIA, and fails, can they be overridden with the COVID waiver, or does the test trump the COVID waiver? So I think what the question is if you know that they took the test and they did not meet the benchmark, so they're not TSI met, can they still be placed using these other placement methods? And the answer is yes, they can be, because the FAQ specifies it's for any students who are not exempt, and a student who has not met TSI is not exempt. So you can mark that no, the student is not met. I know they're not met, and then still mark them with a Z in the waiver question, because if you're using other indicators to determine that they should be placed in a college level course without DE. The next question I see is that, so do we expect students that have a Z, the new option in 2040-60 to have a Z in 21A, 41A, 61A? No, not necessarily. So let me go back here. So if a student, if you don't know their TSI status at census date, so you mark them with a Z in 2040 or 60, there is a possibility that you either place them, you went ahead and placed them in a developmental ed model. So likely you put them in a co-rec, they would still get that option. You would still put option 1, no exemption or waiver granted in 21A, 41A, 61A. So if they're in DE, you just mark them as you normally would, which would be no exemption or waiver granted. Or if the student is not placed in any DE or college level course in that subject, then you would also put choose option 1, no exemption or waiver granted. That Z in 21A, 41A, 61A is only if the student is either not TSI met or TSI unknown, and you decided that based on the placement method your institution developed, it was decided the student could still go into a college level course without support. Okay, so next question. Couldn't we interpret a blank in 2040-60 and 21A, 41A, 61A as unknown? Well, so I think this is just referring to the TSI status questions. There isn't really a blank option. Currently there's only no, they're not met, or yes, they are met. And the situation that we've seen presented is that when a student enrolls, we actually you actually might not have any information because of testing limitations due to COVID. So in a traditional, if things were normal, students are required to be assessed before they're placed, right? And so we would know whether or not they were TSI met or not. But for this time right now, we've heard that there are more situations where a student may have to be placed before there's information about their TSI status, or likely they haven't had a chance to take that TSIA. So in those cases, we're considering that a different situation than just no, they're not met, because actually we don't know. So that's why we're adding this unknown.
And Melissa, this is Julie. I'll add in for research purposes, it will be helpful to know if there's students who, if they already tested, they hadn't met, and you have a score, but then you decide to place them using these other measures into college level coursework, it'll be very helpful for us to have that specific information. So I realize that that seems more complicated to capture those two pieces, but it's going to be important for moving forward to understand that information that you will probably have some students who had tested who are perhaps placed in these other methods into courses. Melissa, is that correct?
Yes,
So,
yes, that is.
yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a repeat of the question. Oh. Let's see. And there's a couple questions about the survey that's coming out. And we will be, and the DEPS goes out in fall. And we just thought that was a good opportunity to get this first survey out at a time when people are already filling out a survey. But we will be asking specifically about placement, the placement decisions you all made, or the placement charts each semester. So in fall, or when we send out the DEPS, the question will ask whether your placement charts were different for summer versus fall. And if they were, we're going to ask for information about each semester. And then we'll follow up in later semesters to find out if your placement charts have changed. We just thought the DEPS was a good chance to reach a lot of people who are already expecting the exam. Sorry, I'm also reading these questions. When will the 002 manual be updated? So I just got an email saying I think it might already be up. If not yet, it will be up by the end of today. So here's another question. We've gotten this question a lot. The FAQ indicates testing needs to happen by the end of the first semester. Is testing optional or required? I'm going to, Suzanne, if you're available, could you answer that question? I know that's a question that she has gotten a lot about what is stated in Rule 4.55 having to do with having to test by the end of the semester.
Yes, hi, thank you, Melissa, and thank you for that question. So as Melissa had explained, Rule 4.55 does state explicitly that students who are placed in the college level course who did not have availability to take the TSIA prior to placement, that they should still be assessed by the end of that term. Now, we also clarified, however, there may be instances where a student is doing very well in the college level course. They're making an A, maybe even a B, and there is every indication that that student will successfully complete the college level course. And in that case, we certainly understand if the institution decides not to assess the student on the TSIA by the end of the term, because the student's successful completion of that college level course will deem the student to be college ready, TSI met, and in that case, that would override any test result. On the other hand, if the student is perhaps borderline, or if the student is unfortunately struggling, in that case, we highly recommend that the student still be assessed by the end of the term. And again, you would have met the rule, but also at the same time, it does allow for an instance if the student doesn't pass the college level course, you do have that assessment score. And by the way, even if the student didn't pass the college level course but passed the TSIA at that point, the student would still be considered TSI met, college ready. Of course, the student would have to repeat the college level course in the next semester, but the student's TSI status would be really clear at that point. So again, the most important thing is that your faculty, your administration get together and determine whatever that policy will be with regard to addressing 4.55. Make it very clear, try to think of all the different scenarios, put it in writing, and make sure all of your faculty, your advisors, your counselors, and most importantly, that the students understand what that policy is and that it is applied equitably and fairly across the board for all students who enter using 4.55.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's cool. And I want to, this chart that I'm showing right now is in the updated manual. And this speaks to some of what Suzanne mentioned, not necessarily the policy your institutions are doing, but the two in the middle are the situations where the student did test before the end of the semester. So if they tested and they met the benchmark, they're TSI met. If they tested and they did not meet the benchmark, then they're not TSI met. However, as Dr. Morales-Vail just mentioned, if they pass that first college level course, then they are met. So the key is looking at everything you know by the end of the semester to see if they've done something that would make them met. I'm going to move on if there aren't any, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but also feel free to email that our new email address. Let me put it back on the screen for a second. If with questions, and we know this is a time of transition for everyone, so we are happy to answer questions that come up as you're trying to program in these changes and work with policies about this. So please feel free to reach out. I mean, and if you don't remember this email address, you're still welcome to email our personal email addresses, but this is meant to make things a little more centralized. All right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Melissa. That was really helpful. I just want to reiterate one point that you made, and that has to do with if you do have dual credit students who are placed in a co-rec that's allowable. As we mentioned, those students won't be allowable for funding. So please be sure that when you report those students, they're not reported in a fundable category. You know, make sure they're reported as not fundable when that's reported. So just wanted to reiterate the importance of that. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the additional frequently asked questions that have come to us and that have been posted on our main website. And so Melissa's going to help me with slides here. There we go. There's the next slide. So this is, I think most of you are probably aware of this, but I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we are posting Q&As. If you go to the main coordinating board website, and this is our new address, it's highered.texas.gov. You will see right there on the first page when you open it up that there's a coronavirus update for higher education posted. So if you click on that link, you'll see on the next slide, there's a whole lot of information. And I am just showing near the bottom because some people don't realize you have to scroll a little bit to get to those frequently asked questions. It didn't start out that way, but we're posting a lot of different information related to the coronavirus situation and higher education. So I just wanted people to be aware that you do have to scroll down, and you'll see that unlike when we began this process, we now have some different groupings of questions, and there's a set that has to do with courses, calendars, and reporting FAQs. So that might be a place to keep an eye on. And when updates are made, the date is updated on the main page. So if you look at it and next time you go in 2 weeks from now, it still says 7/15/2020, you'll know that nothing has changed. But when something does change, we indicate a new date next to that particular question. So if it's a new question that's been added, or if it's an answer that has been updated to a previous question, that's all located here. There's some general questions. There are some questions that might impact reporting folks in the other categories. So you might want to scroll through and look at everything. And I know your folks at your institutions are very tuned in on this, but I wanted you to be aware that we do have an area we'll put information for reporting officials. And now I have copied and pasted a few into the PowerPoint just to make sure you're aware of those and to provide, maybe some updates if I'm able. There are going to be some instances where we're not going to have additional information at this point. In terms of reporting deadlines, we allowed some flexibility to reporting officials to institutions in the spring. I know we continue all to have a whole lot of changes going on, new things going on, but we know it was particularly challenging in the spring. And the spring was the time when we could allow some flexibility. We now coming up to end of summer reporting to fall reporting, we are coming into a formula funding period when we're going to be collecting data from you that we really need to get in a timely manner in order to meet our formula funding deadlines for when data needs to be submitted to the Legislative Budget Board for use in the legislative session. So we unfortunately are not going to be able to change reporting deadlines. We are still going to need to stay very focused on the deadlines that are posted so that we're able to gather the data we need to prepare it and provide it to the legislature. So just wanted to let folks know that's why when you've asked this question, we haven't been able to extend the level of flexibility that we were able to give you in the fall. We do appreciate your efforts to get that data to us, especially into some of those fall reporting deadlines for the beginning of semester reports. Next slide. Okay, so this is an FAQ about incompletes. We heard from a lot of institutions that you're allowing students to make up incompletes and much more frequently than would be typical, and also you're giving students longer extensions for incompletes, and so, of course, all very understandable given the circumstances. We wanted to let institutions know that we think it's important to gather the data about student grades on incompletes. For those of you who are very familiar with the OOS, our student schedule report, we collect the grades once at the end of the semester, and we don't go back and update incompletes because it's a very, very small percentage normally of the grades reported. But in this instance, institutions let us know those numbers were going to go up. We all decided it's very important for us to get that information. It's used for lots of different purposes, including things like success points. So we are going to go ahead and allow a mechanism for you to report those grades at a later point in time. If you have any advice for us on ways to do that, suggestions, feel free to email Victor Reyna. I think everyone probably who's worked in reporting knows him, or John Denning, and provide that information to us. But I think we'll work hard and make sure we get input from institutions to come up with hopefully a very easy, streamlined way for you to resubmit those grades and get them certified. So, and I'd love in the chat, I unfortunately can't see the chat because I had some technical problems today, but if you could sort of indicate when you think you might have some of those grades in, that will certainly help us for planning as well. Okay, next slide. So in terms of flexibility for reporting data, I just wanted folks to be aware that this was an FAQ that didn't have any deadlines on it. We put it out there at the very beginning of the COVID situation when students were starting to go home and institutions were in a position where they told us something was face-to-face and then it was going to be online. So we provided this flexibility, but I did want people to be aware that we did update this to say it was just for spring and summer, and we are going to be providing additional guidance for fall. We're not able to provide that now. There are a lot of factors that go into these types of decisions, but I just wanted everyone to be aware that we will have additional information coming but this flexibility is something that we are not able to extend, and we want you to do the very best you can in terms of reporting how a course evolved. So I shouldn't say evolved, but in terms of your census state reporting, capture the type of instruction. Okay, so the next question. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I should have said the next slide. Thank you, Melissa. In terms of pass-fails, this is something institutions were asking us about last spring, saying, hey, we get a lot of pass-fail and we can't report that on first college level course completion because we had an edit check built in there, for example, on the 002. So we said, okay, well, you know, we use this in our accountability measures for first college level course completion. We can go ahead and take those edit checks off. And then we were asked about whether it could be extended past spring. And we realized that actually that those first college level courses for community colleges are used for success points. We use the grade field for the success point as well as first college level field for making this determination. The rider for success point says a student has to get an A, B, or C. So to try to accommodate institutions that are doing this, we're going to send out some kind of a survey. And if your institution just collects grades A, B, and C as a pass for pass-fail, we'll get that information from you and we'll be able to include those first college level course completions and success points. If your institution does include a D, because of the way the rider is written, that's not something that we're going to be able to allow. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. We will be sending a survey. We appreciate your patience with this, and we will include all those cases where that passes A, B, or C, and of course any student who was given a grade of A, B, or C. Next slide. And I will tell you I'm working on updating that FAQ to capture that information, and then of course we'll provide guidance going into the fall, because right now it just addresses spring and summer. Okay, next slide. Okay, field of study reporting. So some of you might be aware that in the last session there was legislation that there were some changes for related to dual credit, and one was that field of study courses taken by dual credit students could be funded through the formulas. And right now we've looked, and the number of field of study courses taken by dual credit students that weren't reported as fundable is very, very small, because we think for the most part students are doing core courses, the other allowable courses for dual credit. And so we did take a look at the data, but we think there might be a couple of situations where community colleges reported courses as non-fundable that may have been an existing field of study. So we've done the analysis, and we're going to reach out to institutions where we think that might be the case, and we'll make adjustments. So again, several institutions are not involved, but I did want to mention that that is an analysis that we've done, and we will be reaching out, and we'll make a manual change for fall to make sure we include that information. Okay, next. Okay, and then in terms of other frequently asked questions, I just pulled in a couple of others because I wanted to make sure that folks were aware that there are others out there that aren't in the reporting area. There's questions about CTE courses. There's questions about Common Calendar. You know, there's absolutely questions that relate to reporting. I didn't think I needed to bring them all forward, but I wanted people to be aware that we do have question and answers posted online regarding some other areas that may impact our reporting officials. So I believe that's everything we have. Our next slide should probably be questions. And we'll see. Do we have a question slide? Yes. And Victor is going to go ahead and send me those questions via email. We thought that might be fastest, and I'm hoping he sent some already. And Victor, is that going to work for us today?
Julie, you should have some questions in your email, and if you'd like, I could read them from the chat window for you.
John sent them. No, I do have them. I'm sorry, I was looking from Victor, so thank you very much. So, will there not be a survey for summer 2020? Does this have to do with the depth survey? I'm not sure.
I tried to answer that in my responses.
Okay, so that was when you were doing the depth, yeah. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that depth survey, I don't want the reporting officials to think they're going to get some survey now that they have to answer that they haven't in the past. The Developmental Education Program Survey is something that we've been doing for years. There's a person on every campus who does this, who's very familiar with it. It may be the reporting officials in some cases, but often it's going to be your assessment center, your folks who deal with DE. So they'll be able, the questions will be such that they should be able to answer the questions without input from the reporting officials, but it will allow us to know what methods are used for placement. So when you tell us the student was a Z student, we'll have information about how they were placed. Or if you tell us the student didn't meet TSI, but they were placed in a college level course alone, we'll have information about what your placement method was. So thank you again for doing that for us and providing that information. Okay, the FAQ indicates testing by end of, okay, all of these seem to be our CBM 002. Will there be any webinars on the CBM 002? That's the transfer report. That is a report that only applies to universities. And if folks at universities feel like it would be helpful for us to provide additional information, we can do that. But if you have any questions today, I know John Dinning and I are both fairly familiar with that report and could probably answer if you have any questions you'd like to put in for today. In fact, if folks could put in the chat from universities if they think that would be helpful, or if you feel like you already have a pretty good understanding of what's needed for that CBM 00T report, let us know in the chat as well. Okay, and then is the Texas Connection Consortium aware of these changes? So I know we do sit in on some of the calls and work with some of the groups that work with our vendors, our other reporting partnerships, that type of thing. We did distribute the CBM 00 changes to everyone for feedback a couple of weeks ago. As I said, we had a work group working in June at the through the Association of Community Colleges that had full representation from our different sectors, and then had some back and forth with them, and then we shared it with all the reporting officials. So if reporting officials have not shared those changes, and they may not have wanted to till they were finalized, then please, if you're a part of any of these groups where it would be helpful to get these changes, please share it with them. And our staff who certainly that have any contact with some of the user groups will certainly share as well. Okay, I'm going to see if any more have come in now. We'll give it another minute or two.
So Julie, we have one comment here. Angelina College is allowing students that received an I grade in spring 2020 until the end of fall 2020 to complete that coursework. And then two other comments. One in favor of a webinar for the WOT, and another, Grace Challen would like to hear discussions on the WOT.
Okay. So I think I'm probably aware of some of the issues. I think in terms of the WOT, the place where we have had questions is around providing the reason why a course did not transfer. And but it would be helpful for those of you who are interested if you could kind of let us know where your areas of question lie so that we can be prepared when we come to you. We asked for questions for this webinar and didn't see anything on the T. I want to make sure we make good use of everyone's time if we do provide something. Again, we would just offer that for our university reporting officials if we do that. So please do send what your questions are. If there are things we haven't thought of and may need a little research, that gives us the opportunity to do some research on that new report. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure to be with everyone today. We really do appreciate all of the hard work that all of you are doing. We know based on activity at our agency that we've all had a lot of new responsibilities. There have been a lot of challenges, and we're all, I think, trying to work together for the students of Texas, because of course it's a challenging time for students and their families as well. So we do have the FAQ process, so feel free to ask questions, and we have a group at the agency that's involved in providing answers to those. So please, again, do feel free to ask any questions that you have and contact us. We so appreciate the effort that's going to go into the CBM 002 changes. As Melissa said, we worked very hard to keep it as minimal as possible in terms of those changes, but it's very important that we collect that additional information. And again, moving forward, we appreciate you very much and your contributions for students of the state. I feel like there's going to be a great deal of interest in the data from this year, because it's been such an unusual year, and so working your best to provide us accurate data is very much appreciated, so that as we move forward and we start to try to understand what's occurred over the last years, I think it'll be helpful, again, to understand how it's impacted higher education and some of these changes, such as with the 002. And finally, we will be doing, for those of you who helped with the preliminary enrollments, which I think many of you did, in terms of this summer preliminary enrollment, which was a very, very tight turnaround. We did do a presentation for the board on that, and can make it available if you're interested. And we will be doing our preliminary enrollment again at the regular time this fall. So do anticipate that we're going to be doing that. I think it's a very important time to be tracking enrollments, and we saw some real variation in enrollments this summer. Some places were higher than usual, some were lower, some real big swings and shifts from looking at the prior year to current year for many institutions. So just wanted to thank you all for your participation in that. I know it was a challenging thing to turn around in a tight time frame, but it was very helpful to have that information.
Julie,
Okay.
we do have one more question from you. For you,
sure.
if there's time.
Sure.
Could you address the question of out-of-state students in online courses and reporting?
Oh, that's a good question. And actually, we have a slide. And if we were asked, I was going to provide that slide. So if you actually go back to the PowerPoint and and maybe, is it possible to unhide that last slide that comes right after this one?
Give me a second. I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, this is an issue that we are aware of, and that folks are working on, and I'm going to just show you the FAQ that is out there now that applies to spring and summer, and then I'll let Emily Cormier, because that does have to do with formula funding. I'll let her jump in if she's still on the call, if she wants to add to that information. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have hidden that slide. I should have left it to be able to move forward. But here we go. Okay, so as you can see on the slide, the question has to do with reporting courses for formula funding for non-resident students who are traditionally on campus but have moved back to their home state or country, and are taking courses that moved online during summer. So one thing, if people are, really all should be aware, that students who are taking courses only online, who are not in Texas, who are residing in another state and are residents of another state or another country, the courses that they take are not fundable. But there are, of course, when students are attending in Texas, they are fundable. This is a fairly complicated question. So we've provided some information how institutions could think about this for summer, and we're still waiting for some guidance on fall, and I'm going to see if Emily's on the call and wants to provide that. But feel free to read what's here. I wanted you to at least be aware that there is a related FAQ for summer. Emily, are you with us still?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Julie, I think you covered it well. So obviously this guidance is in effect for the summer and for how you can report for those students. There are still ongoing conversations regarding new entering students and for the fall, and it is something we're aware of and looking at. So we will provide any information as we have it. But as of now, you know, the rules are in place and have to be followed as they're currently stated.
Thank you very much. Yes, so if there are any, you know, additional questions about as Emily said, following the rules as currently stated, feel free to contact me. Okay. Well, if we don't have any additional questions, again, thank you all very much for joining us, and we look forward to a time when we can all see each other in person again and have the opportunity to talk about reporting issues. But thanks once again for taking the time out today to participate. Okay, thank you, Victor.